Well, welcome back, everybody. Good evening again, and thank you for joining us for this special Fashion Film Club evening at the Garden Cinema. My name is Sarah Bailey. I'm a writer, an editor, and founder of the Fashion Film Club. And I think after that kaleidoscope of choreography, comedy, coin covered bodysuits, and that stirring finale that I don't think any of us really anticipated, please, can I ask you to put your hands together and welcome our special guest, Holly Waddington.
Hello. Thank you for coming, everybody.
The renowned costume designer who won a much deserved Academy Award for her work in Poor Things earlier this year. Yay. And also celebrated for her work in Lady Macbeth, The Great, and much, much more. So, Holly, thank you so much for selecting this multifaceted gem for Fashion Film Club.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me.
And people who were at the last event will know it's particularly significant to share the garden stage with you because Poor Things and your extraordinary costume work was the subject of our first conversation with Judith Watt, who's in the audience this evening. So we're going to talk a little about you and your creative journey this evening, Holly. But I think first we're all buzzing, literally buzzing, about what we've just seen. I mean, I feel so exhilarated and moved by seeing it again, and particularly seeing it on the big screen. And Holly, you know, we've been talking for the last few weeks about this film, and I wanted to ask you how you feel the film plays now, where we are in the world, and how did it feel watching it today?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I really want to know if people liked it because I haven't actually seen it on the big screen before. I've seen it in snippets as a child, and I saw it on like VHS in about 1998. And it's a very different experience seeing it on a big screen. I think the film is historically, culturally, and aesthetically really significant. I think that Busby Berkeley, you know, I have always loved Busby Berkeley. I discovered him as a child. I grew up in Lancashire. We walked every Saturday from our village to my grandmother's village, and you know through fields and I'm going a bit off track here, but I'll just quickly tell you the story through fields and woodland to get to my grandma's atmospheric, amazing house where she would be always on a Saturday doing her washing through clouds of cigarette smoke. And one of these films would always be on. There would always be a spaghetti western or a Busby Berkeley or, you know, one of the big American Hollywood musicals playing. And through this kind of delightful atmosphere that I was exposed to at her house, which was all about her, I was also exposed to these incredible films, but only in snippets, in nuggets. And I revisited them, you know, years later as an art student. I just was fascinated by the imagery, really. I'm slightly lost track of what the question is, but yeah, like I chose the film really because I wanted to see one on the big screen, and that's it, really.
So, yeah, when we first spoke, you said, yes, I want to do a Busby Berkeley film. And I agree. It's extraordinary to see this film on the big screen. And I think one of the things that, you know, I mean, I guess the clue is in the name, but it is a Great Depression musical. It is so surprising to see subjects of class, to feel poverty nipping at the heels of our kind of comedians, and to have that great finale, which is all about, you know, the kind of social conscious of the movie. It's so extraordinary. It's so different. And I think, you know, interesting to, you know, to see it in this moment, you know, when we're, you know, with a very tough time for the world. But as you, you know, painted that picture so beautifully for us and in your opening remarks, Holly, fantasy, escapism, we escaped, didn't we, for an hour and a half this evening.
Absolutely.
But I think watching the choreographic sequences on the big screen for me was extraordinary. I think a lot of us grew up with the idea that Busby Berkeley was somehow a sort of byword for something that's a bit synthetic and cheesy, the kind of worst side of Hollywood. But to watch them this evening, I mean, it would be interesting when we open up to see how other people in the audience felt. For me, you're seeing filmmaking and artistic brilliance. So shall we talk about some of those sequences?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yes. I mean, it would be very easy, wouldn't it, to be quite reductive in a conversation about, or in thinking about Busby Berkeley. You know, there's a lot of women. They're all the same height. They've all got long legs. They're wearing they're scantily clad, and they're always smiling. And they're all doing these quite simple actions that are quite easy to do. You know, it isn't complicated, really, the movement. But there is something so joyful and there's something so joyful about the way that they're doing it, and these cutbacks into their close-ups on their faces. They're always smiling, and the narratives are always about very human subjects. You know, they're always about love and desire, and so, you know, I just love them. I want to be immersed in them, and I sort of want to. I can't get enough of those sequences. I mean, the acting, you know, whether the acting has aged well. I think that we've really moved. You know, we've moved very far, haven't we, with filmmaking. I'm not sure that I could watch those parts, you know, over and over again, but I certainly could watch those sequences repeatedly. In fact, I might consider that as something to do when I'm in an old people's home, maybe when I'm in my 90s. If I get that far, it'd be a good idea.
The petting in the park sequence, that feels like one that is really worth unpicking. There's so much that goes on in that. I mean, it's so sensual. It's full of kind of comic elements, some, you know, more successful than others, some easier to watch than others, but everything happens in that dance sequence. Shall we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I was here. I learned that petting in the park was about the fact that in New York at the time, you couldn't, landlords specify that you couldn't take your lover or your, you know, boyfriend or girlfriend or whoever really back to your apartment. There were very strict rules about that, and so petting in the park is about getting off with people in the park, which I think is really funny. And you know, it's I think you know, it goes into, we go through all the seasons. I think that's why we have, you know, the different suddenly they're in a massive snowball fight, you know, with huge plastic snowballs, and there's this strange lascivious baby, you know, weird. I mean, there's some things like
the terrifying child.
The terrifying child who actually looks like one of my children.
And the actor was age 9. Sorry to
age 9. Yes. And then we get to the summer bit, which is my favourite, with those absolutely exquisite sheer dresses. And they're beautiful, and they do show the body, but it's not in a pornographic way. It's really sensuous, and all the girls seem to be having a nice time. I find it totally inoffensive as a woman, all of this stuff. I love it. I think it's really joyful and celebratory, and so, and then they all get soaking wet, and then they're in this kind of Alfred Hitchcockian rear window situation with the blinds going up and down, and getting these lovely fragments of the body, which are gorgeous and much repeated in popular culture, you know, from then on. And then where do we get to?
Then
they go and get changed.
Love one of the costumes
into the metal costumes.
Camisole.
The metal camisole chastity costume with the Warholian metallic shorts, which are really cool.
We've thought a lot about that outfit because Ruby Keeler looks Polly Parker looks amazing. The most gorgeous and sexy that, you know, in that movie.
Absolutely.
When she hasn't got her Marcel waves, when her hair is wet and pushed back.
As soon as that Marcel wave goes, it suddenly feels modern, doesn't it?
And we're both fascinated by that costume with the metal camisole.
Love it.
I mean, people who've been watching the runways and recently, I mean, really reminds me of some of the things that Jonathan Anderson gets up to. It's really got that feeling about it. We looked at Barbarella and we could see
Barbarella. I think there's we talked about. We were talking about Paco Rabanne really for the In the Money, but you know, if it has those bodices have a kind of 60s quality to them, I think.
And let's talk quickly about Shadow Waltz, which is utterly glorious. It's kind of like Man Ray at times.
Amazing.
The the filmmaking is extraordinary with the neon violins, and the costumes as well. I mean, let's talk about those hoop dresses, because I think in a way that was one of your first thoughts when we discussed the movie this evening.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say that, I think Busby Berkeley was a surrealist, and I find it really amazing that in a really mainstream blockbuster film of the 30s, they'd have this level of surrealism just plonked in the middle of a narrative. The hoop dresses, I mean, I think to deliver those as exquisitely as they are takes some doing. It's the sort of thing that you see in a pantomime, dresses with plastic hoops in, and it normally doesn't go very well. It's normally a bit naff. And I've seen, Matthew Barney repeated those dresses in the Cremaster cycle, and they were good, but these are on another level. They're exquisite. Ori Kelly was the costume designer, and what an incredible talent he was. I think they're made of organza, those hoops. They've got this wonderful lightness to them. They have a sort of, maybe it's a fine, maybe it's plastic, it may even be a metal hoop, maybe a sort of fine steel cage. I love the way the glittery, twinkly bits work, all the shimmering around the orifices, around the edges, around those amazing sort of, they look like spandex, those wigs, those sort of platinum spandex wigs, but they're probably, I don't know what they are. There might be people in the audience who know what they are. It's like a sort of early spandex, sort of crystally sequin thing going on, and then all of the sheer on the body and the sequins. It's almost like every ballroom dancing, strictly every ballroom dancing competitive ballroom dancing costume sort of comes from this language.
And I think the way the hoops are incorporated in the dress, just as you said, it's asymmetric.
One is asymmetric.
They where they turn,
the way they move.
There's nothing clunky about it, and it echoes that incredible curvilinear set.
The curvilinear set is like heaven. It's like a sort of idea of heaven, isn't it? The way that it flows and the way those hoops move through the space. It's slow, and it's what's the word? It's slow and sort of, I don't know.
The movement's incredibly
but they move at a
sensual,
pace that's sensual and slow, which just feels like just the whole thing is transportative.
And as you said, I mean, those dresses, I think, are very influential in terms of fashion and costume. It's a pity we don't have slides here now. If you look at that incredible image from the Cremaster cycle, Matthew Barney repeating it, it is a little bit more crude, actually.
It is crude compared. I mean, it's still good, but it has nothing of the delicacy of Ori Kelly's designs.
And I think, again, looking at the runway this season, we see those hoops in, I can see, and I think Josephine nodding, in the Loewe dresses with the, the floral, floating down the runway. And I think, what's incredible about the way costume comes to life in this film is how it moves.
Yes, absolutely.
And of course, you're someone personally who has experience of making costumes, designing costumes that have to move.
Yeah, I do work a lot in dance. I love to work. I mean, in Poor Things, I had to do. I mean, all costumes have to move, but in Poor Things, there was a dance sequence that and actually, I think that whilst this film wasn't a direct reference, I do feel like I was looking at a lot of 30s Hollywood imagery for the film, particularly the dress that Joan Crawford wore in. I have to look at my notes here because I won't remember the name of the film. Letty Linton. She wears this really incredible dress with loads of ruffles, and that was a source of inspiration. But I do work a lot with dancers, and I'm working with ballet dancers at the moment, and I do think a lot about the way that fabric moves. It's very important.
I know when we first started talking about the film after we both watched it, we were both incredibly struck by the presence of Ginger Rogers and
Absolutely.
that opening sequence. And I think the framing of her face, the sensuality of the mouth, the imperfectness of that face, but the sort of sexiness, the kind of breaking of the fourth wall, looking right at the audience, how incredibly knowing it is. I think we both found that really exciting, and it really sets the tone.
Really sets the tone, yeah. I mean, there's we're used to a much more polished world, aren't we? Like our films are, everything is so filtered, and even the way that we all want to look, we're all giving ourselves a Botox sheen and getting our teeth straightened, and there's just something really wonderful about this really natural body shape and face. I mean, she is obviously gorgeous, but her mouth is crooked, and you can see this tongue. The camera goes really into her fleshy tongue, which I think is really interesting. Nothing like this, we just don't do it. It feels quite wild compared to today's standards, and she's just so assured and easy in that role. It's a very, it's so unaffected and instinctive. I think that performance.
I mean, a couple of things you've touched on there I find so interesting, Holly. How sanitized contemporary beauty norms are.
Yeah.
How to see Ginger Rogers in that sort of just her raw beauty is it's so engaging, so sexy, and she feels very empowered to me, I have to say.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what the other thing I was going to say, but we love the coin costumes. We have to talk about the coin costumes. I mean, I alluded at the beginning of this evening that this is classified as a pre-code film, even though it is 33 and the code starts in 30. It's not really strictly enforced until 34. And this is one of the, you can see everything about this production is pushing the code.
Absolutely.
It's full of peekaboo. It's full of
nudity. There's so much nudity, yeah.
Let's talk about those costumes in the opening number.
I mean, I just one thing that interests me is black and white, and the way that all of the metallics, all of those different shades that you get in a sequin, just create this incredible richness and texture. And throughout the film, there's a lot of metallics are used. And I've been trying to find out a little bit more about the costumes and actually the colours of the costumes, because it's all shot in black and white, obviously. And I actually don't know very much about how you design for black and white. I did have to do it in Poor Things, but it was a bit of an accident. And so, anyway, I had a lovely email back from the Warner Brothers archive to say that he also didn't know much about it either, but that he thought that using those metallics was a really important part of working in black and white. And that's very apparent. I think the coins are a little bit they feel like a precursor to Paco Rabanne to me. They feel the line of Ginger Rogers bikini thing is like a sort of 60s thing to me. It also feels like a precursor to Bieber.
I think I certainly felt watching the film. I've seen so much of the influence of this film on 70s fashion,
absolutely,
and clothing and costume, and this is going to bring us on in a moment to talk about source material and how you work with source material, because I think it's so interesting. But I think it's kind of like really worth remembering that if we think about the impact of this film on the 70s fashion, of course, people weren't able to access image libraries. They would have had to watch it at their grandma's house, or kind of like watch it on a reel-to-reel. But we do know that there was a sort of resurgence of interest in Busby Berkeley in the 60s and 70s. Apparently, after sort of kind of like going out of fashion a little bit after the Second World War, Busby Berkeley films were shown late at night on American TV, which I find so interesting. And I think, maybe who was watching. And then in the 1970s, there was a real sort of kind of resurrection of his reputation. There was a big retrospective in Paris in 1971. And then Ken Russell in 71 also makes The Boyfriend. And he is kind of referencing Busby
Absolutely.
Berkeley, but I think we do feel when you look at the dance sequences, they're nothing like the
Nothing
real
like,
thing.
no.
Let's talk then about inspiration and kind of going back to the source. And I think lots of people would like to know how you work.
Well, I really try to fight Pinterest algorithms in my work. So I don't want to. Well, I think we all use Pinterest and Google as a starting point, but I'm always trying to find much primary sources and much more. I prefer to use libraries. I like to see the actual film, and I think it's. I get fed up of the images that come through on something like Pinterest because they just go round in circles. I could be doing 4 different projects at the same time, and I'm sort of getting this pool of images that are the same images. And also you only get fragments of them. You just get like a little glimmer of something that might be interesting, but you don't really find out who the artist is or who the people are. And so I really, for my own practice, I want to be in the library. I start in open bookshelves. I go to Goldsmiths Art Library as a starting point because I like an open bookshelf. I then go to the British Library. I go to the V&A Library, and I go and see stuff. I think seeing this film was really a really good example of that because I think we all think we know about Busby Berkeley. The images as film stills only tell you so much. I think to actually, and also to see it on this big screen was a real gift for me because I've only ever seen these dance sequences on tiny little black and white TV or on a small, on VHS years ago on a telly. So to see them on this scale, really, you get a sense of how powerful it would be to be going to the cinema to see this, to escape from all of what was going on in the 30s. The Hollywood was escapist at that time. People had lived through World War One. Then the Great Depression happened in 1929, and then it was into the rise of fascism and World War Two. It was pretty bleak, and there was mass unemployment, mass poverty. So you can imagine entering a sort of cathedral-like cinema in wherever in America, wherever would be an incredible form of escapism.
And I think when you say watch the shadow wall sequence, I mean, it's 7 minutes long. I think in a lot of modern mainstream cinema, the audience is never given that experience just to dream for 7 minutes. The narrative isn't being pushed forward. You're just, it's more like being in an immersive artwork.
Yeah, definitely.
That just staying with surrealism for a minute, and that sort of almost hallucinogenic kind of quality of those those sequences with the crazy oversized props, and just bringing us up to date and talking about your work with Yorgos Lanthimos and Shona Heath on Poor Things. Is this a film that Yorgos would have referenced?
Actually not. It's funny because we didn't ever talk about the Gold Diggers of 33. We didn't talk about Busby Berkeley, actually, but strangely, these films were always in the back of my mind. He did say to us all that he was looking at early filming techniques and early Hollywood, and I think I thought he meant even more literally. I thought that he wanted the spaces to be even more artificial than they were. For those that have or haven't seen Poor Things, it's the sets were all built from scratch. So Shona Heath, the production designer, teamed with James Price. They built everything apart from maybe 1 or 2 spaces. So though the worlds of Poor Things were how I imagine it would be to go on to a Busby Berkeley set. The cruise ship in Poor Things was a massive set in an aircraft hangar, and it was a surreal and transportative. Just to walk on there was quite totally like going into the most exquisite immersive piece of theatre you could imagine. So there are correlations there. We didn't talk specifically actually about any films. That's how I work with Yorgos. Communication is quite sort of brief and not so, he works with few words, shall we say. But I sort of think through inference, I knew that he was quite interested in the stuff that I then, I was looking at lots of 30s references, and the reinterpretation of the big sleeves, not in a Victorian way, in a fresher, later way, was kind of what I was interested in. One of the things I was interested in. And also the body, all the textures. You see it a lot in this film. That amazing dressing gown that Carol wears. I've never seen anything like that before, and I'd completely forgotten it until we started thinking about this. These holes, these orifices around her shoulders are exquisite, aren't they? They're just so sexy and suggestive and unusual. Never seen anything like them before, and I wish I'd seen that before. I wish I'd really gone to the primary source and seen the film, because I think I would have done one for Bella. I think I would have made one.
You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. So so much to cover, and I'm sure you'll have so many questions from what Holly's been talking about. But just kind of one question before we open up, and that's really the kind of how the Depression era and poverty is represented in the film. I mean, our chiseling showgirls, they're represented so sympathetically. We're absolutely rooting for these sassy, clever foxes. But it's quite a vanilla portrayal of poverty. Their hovel doesn't look that bad, does it? No, sleeping in full makeup, so funny. But the final number, Remember My Forgotten Man, there's this German expressionist set. But suddenly we get naturalism. It's
devastating, isn't it? I found that really moving to see that. And again, I think seeing on this scale is really important. It's a real surprise, this number at the end, because until that point, I as a costume designer, I'm looking at the expression of poverty and thinking they haven't done a very good job here, because now we're very good at it. We have people whose job is to do breaking. It's called breaking down. We have a whole department devoted to that. So in a war film, you'd have people who would spend all day dipping and dyeing and cheese grating and using all sorts of things to communicate the way that clothes break down in all sorts of situations. And so the way that poverty is described is not good at the beginning. It feels they don't feel like they're living in poverty. They're all wearing extremely well cut dresses with full faces of makeup. And then at the beginning of My Forgotten Man, Carol wears this black, amazing velvet pencil skirt, which feels like a couple of decades earlier. It feels very 1950s to me. And it has these regular slashes around the hem, which is like a sort of comedy version of breaking down. It's sort of what you'd imagine from a pantomime. It doesn't feel at all naturalistic. But then when that number opens up, it is naturalistic. So there's something going on that I'd love to find out more about these decisions. I don't know. The way that scene is delivered, is so real, isn't it? Like, it's very powerful in that way. There's no artifice. It doesn't feel artificial. So yeah, I don't know what Ori Kelly was thinking. Like, was that deliberate?
I mean, these varying tone shifts, aesthetically and dramatically, they're what makes this movie so particular. Yes, I think, yes, we can say it is frustrating in some ways, but it makes it the most absolutely fascinating kind of artifact to kind of like to think about.
Yeah.
So I think we've got time for about 20 minutes of questions from the floor, if that's 15 maybe. We'd love to hear your reflections and questions about the film. And of course, Holly is also happy to answer some questions about her career and inspiration. So who's going to kick us off? Thank you.
Hello. Thank you very much for the introduction. I just wanted to ask about, you mentioned about texture, and obviously we see in the black and white it really comes to the fore in the glistening and the glittering, and then also in the woven fabrics, etc. But in your work and in your experience, how important is texture to you as opposed to silhouette?
They're both really important to me. I think silhouette shape comes first for me. And I mean, I don't know if I could even position them. I think it depends on the project. Shape is really crucial for me, number one, and texture too. You know, I think when you're working in film, I mean, I think when you're working in black and white, texture is absolutely paramount. I think it's how you communicate depth and give the costumes some life and information. Certainly on Poor Things, texture was crucial. I spent a lot of time making textures and sending, you know, the buyers were looking for anything that had interesting bodily textures. I think it depends on the project as well.
And in theatre,
In theatre, I think texture is crucial because, well, it's much. It depends on what it is. But at the moment, I'm doing an opera, and you know everything has to be seen from so far away. So to communicate texture, it has to be done in the most blown out of proportion way. I think it depends what it is though, because you might want something that's very cartoony and flat. You know, if you're doing, are there projects that would call for no texture? Don't you think? I mean, no.
No.
You know, if you were doing like a piece that needed to look like a Roy Lichtenstein painting, just as an example, you wouldn't want that. You'd want everything to look ultra matte. But I do think about texture a lot. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I imagine one of the most interesting things about your job is that it allows you to like live in different moments. And I just wonder like where you are right now. And if I were to go home tonight and fall down a rabbit hole, like where should I go?
Can you say the last bit? I'm slightly deaf. Can
Oh,
you say the last bit again?
I mumble, so it's a good combination. No, I was just gonna say if I were to go home tonight and fall down a rabbit hole, like where should I go?
Where should you go?
It's a real question.
I think being one of the things that I love about costume design, I mean, there are lots of things that I love about it, but I think the thing that I love the most is that it gives us the opportunity to travel in time. Like, I think it's the closest that you could get to time traveling. Like, there is something so, like, I think maybe some of us are more kind of predisposed to wanting to do that, but I love to like get immersed in a period. And I know I've got friends here who are working as designers and costumers, and I think we all love that. I think that's a thing that we have in common. Like, I feel like I've just got such an affinity with different periods in time. Where you should go in your rabbit hole, I don't know. Where do you think you should go? I mean,
I think
I'm heading down to I want to go down to the Shadow Waltz.
No, I asked because like I just struggle with the same affliction, which is like I just feel like I see the same images all the time. And so I just wondered like if where you are right now with your work, if there's something you're particularly drawn to or inspired by.
Well, I'm doing an opera at the moment about Frida Kahlo, and I shouldn't probably tell you. Yeah, I'm really interested in the surrealism of her work actually, and Diego Rivera's murals. I mean, you know, there's a lot of good stuff to look at, isn't there? I mean, this whole thing about Pinterest, these like little sound bites. I think we need to go deeper in our research and find our own ways of creating new stuff. Actually, I don't think we should at all be seduced by AI. Or I think it's part of certainly what I want to do is find a language that is my own. That's what I'm trying to do in all of my projects, really.
Thank you.
Okay.
But I make it quick then. Yeah, I was fascinated in several things that you said. Also, we have very similar grandmothers. I used to go around to my grandmother's, and she used to watch lovely old black and white movies.
Oh,
She worked in the rag trade for
Oh.
theatrical costumiers, not a
Wow.
costume designer. But
which one? I probably won't know.
Julian's used to be on South Moulton Street.
Oh,
don't know.
really?
It's but this goes right back. This is pre-war. You know, she's like,
Wow.
but she knew these things. So the similar thing, and it's funny. I saw Poor Things just before Christmas, and I was astounded by it. I didn't really know what to expect. And the whole thing was wonderful, and it's so funny that you should choose this movie. That's because I kind of saw when I saw that this was your choice of movie, I could see the kind of influence that it had had on you
Right.
for Poor Things, which I think is great. And I love this film a lot. But it's also very interesting because it was made at the time when there really was a Great Depression on,
Hmm.
and cinema and the studios themselves were beginning to, cinema attendance was dropping, and people were worried about, and there was this newfangled thing called commercial radio, and people were staying at home to listen to the radio and not going to the cinema,
Uh-huh.
and they were quite. So this kind of thing here was a kind of a response. This was everything in the kitchen sink into
Yeah.
a film to try to get people back into the cinemas or to keep people going to the cinema.
Yes.
So it's
feast.
just what sort of so lovely about the thing. And also, I happen to think I've watched a lot of movies from this era, and I'm very fond of them. And I think that a lot of film stars and actors of today would kill for some of the dialogue they had in the movies of the
Absolutely.
30s and 40s. So I think that they do have a great relevance. And of course, now we're also in a situation where cinema attendance is falling, and people are really desperate to keep people coming into the cinema. So that's that sort
We
of
need more
relevance as
visual.
well.
We need more spectacle.
Yeah. I'm sorry, that didn't turn out to be much of a question in the end, but if
No,
you'd like to
it's
comment on
musings.
it.
I like
And
it.
who would you cast as Trixie if you were making this film
Well, you see,
today?
it's a wonderful thing you should say
She's
that
brilliant.
because I loved Poor Things, and I was very fond of Emma Stone. I wasn't
Yeah.
a big fan because, I'm a Singing in the Rain fan, and La La Land left me a bit cold.
Oh, did it?
But
Yeah,
I
I
would love
loved
to
it.
see, her. I mean, I think there are some fun. I mean, I watched a series called Babylon Berlin recently with Lisa Friers was in it, and Leonie Vinny. There was a tremendous cast in it, and the first minute I saw them, I thought, "Who the hell is that?" Because they could have just stepped straight out of a Fritz Lang movie, half of that cast. So yeah, I think it's all around.
I think we wanted to cast a young Angelica Houston as Trixie, didn't we?
yes, yeah. Yeah.
It's not a question. It's just a really quick comment. I absolutely loved how loads of the dresses reference themselves. So there'd be a fold from somewhere that came through a peephole and appeared somewhere else, or a piece
the
of
drugstore hostess dress.
incredible, or a top what became its own scarf, or the buttons that were here were also there. They were kind of whole worlds in themselves, each outfit, and it made me realize I'm not used to seeing that.
That's a really 1930s thing, actually. They made many, a garment would do several things. So, because they were making a lot with little, you'd have a blouse with 3 different ways to wear it. There'd be a jabot or a fan that, went through a little gap they could be tied in several ways. They'd have cuffs that pop on and pop off. It was a theme.
Yes, because they look sort of almost origami, some of them, but the way they had these fans and folds, and they felt very, very structured.
Like little organdy, fluted bits of stuff.
You're fascinated by that dress that drives the plot forward. They've got one good dress
dress
between
is
them. They
great.
got to, play a game.
I
see
thought
who
that
wears
was quite
it.
like poverty and being a dancer and just not being able to eat, and there was one dress that you all share, and they felt quite.
That's someone's uniform. It's their drugstore uniform. But anyhow, yes, we're going to continue this conversation in the bar. I'd like to thank you all for your contributions and to the wonderful Garden Cinema team for supporting us this evening. If you'd like to hear about more Fashion Film Club screenings, please follow on Instagram at Fashion Film Club FFC. And I'm going to post some of the images and references that Holly and I have been talking about this evening. And finally, thank you to the profoundly wonderful, inspiring Holly Waddington.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
For being so much fun to talk to over the last few weeks, and for choosing this film and for sharing her wonderful insights. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Sarah. It's been really fun.